So now we find out in the press, the Associated Press reporting recently, two Iraqi officials saying we're very close to a deal on getting out of Iraq by 2010.
Right.
Is that further validation? By the way, that would be combat troops leaving by 2010, and then we would have other support troops leave within 3 years if that deal does get finalized. Does that, again, in some way validate the responsible plan and Barack Obama's position on it as well, since that seems to be pretty much in line with what you guys suggested in your report and what Obama suggested on the campaign?
Yes, it very much is the position that Senator Obama has taken, and that the responsible plan lays out, that we need to start withdrawing troops, and to do so at the fastest, safe rate that we can, which, you know, the reasonable estimates were that it would be roughly 1 brigade per month, based on what our military planners were telling us, which puts us into 2010 if we start in January.
So now, on the other hand, Senator Obama was talking about bringing troops out of Iraq and into Afghanistan. Do we need a new responsible plan to end the war in Afghanistan?
Well, we need to address some real problems that we have in Afghanistan. And again, there isn't solely a military solution. To the extent that there's a terrorist threat to the rest of the world, it's in the mountains between Afghanistan and Pakistan that is the center of that threat. And we have to do the diplomatic, political, economic, and to some extent military things that are necessary to alleviate that threat. But we'll be much better off if we do that in a way that involves much of the rest of the world and that uses the effective tools in our toolbox, not just the military ones.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because the responsible plan that you helped to author is quite broad. It also gets into the issues of media consolidation. And some would ask, why so broad? Why talk about media consolidation in relationship to Iraq or Afghanistan?
Well, one of the things we wanted to address was the institutional failures that got us into this mess to begin with. Our Congress failed us. Our media failed us. The judicial branch of our country failed us, and that got us to this point where things were really, really bad. And so we went through and we looked at what each of the key pieces were and how we might set about fixing them. How do we restore the checks and balances between the executive branch and the judicial branch? Between the executive branch and the legislative branch? How do we deal with the failures in the media to accurately cover what was actually happening, what the information was, what the options on the ground were, instead of just repeating talking points, and particularly instead of just having people paid by the Department of Defense to say the DoD talking points, give those talking points as supposed experts. I mean, it isn't enough for us to end this war if we don't fix the underlying institutional failures that caused the problem to begin with.
Darcy, I do want to come back to this idea of troops, though. Do you think that the extra troops help to stabilize the situation at all? And, you know, I know that in the responsible plan you talk a lot about diplomacy, which makes perfect sense, but isn't part of diplomacy the implicit threat of force as well? That's the stick of the carrot and stick equation?
Well, the problem is when you use only sticks. I mean, I have, kind of notoriously now since he was rescued from the fire, but I have a golden retriever who's almost a year old. And I have found, as I think most dog owners do, that positive reinforcement is much more effective than negative reinforcement in getting him to do what I want him to do. I can yell at him all I want, but if I give him a treat for doing the right thing, he's much more likely to do it. When we look at the tools in our toolbox for dealing with the situation we had in Iraq, we had an administration that was only willing to use the military, that was only willing to use sticks. It was very open about the fact that they didn't think diplomacy was appropriate. They didn't think talking to people ever got anything done. And they were wrong. And that needed to be addressed.
But Darcy, real quick, Darcy, that's definitely true. But don't you need the threat of the stick around? And if you take the troops out, is that threat diminished at all?
Well, I think that having real military strength, whether it's just the United States or the United States in combination with other countries, is one of the ways that we can create the kind of incentives for people not to start wars, not to commit terrorist acts, that sort of thing. The problem comes when you're all stick and no incentive. We have been in a situation in which we haven't been rational at all about this, and in fact, we have been destroying our military capacity. At this point, the military is having a great deal of difficulty keeping people in. A huge percentage of our equipment has been destroyed. We don't have the capacity to go anywhere else, even if we need to. We don't have the capacity to do what we need to do in Afghanistan because of what they have done in Iraq.
Right.
I would make the argument that the destruction of military capacity is a huge amount of damage to the United States and our ability to deal with the rest of the world constructively moving forward.
And in that analogy, we would thereby be diminishing our stick, as it were.
That's exactly right.
Okay. Now, Darcy, we've run out of time, but we really want to thank you for coming on Meet the Bloggers. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.